Hi, everybody. Today's Monday, August 25th, 2025, and our friend Larry Johnson is back with us. Welcome back, Larry.
Good Monday. How are you?
Yeah. Larry, let's start with what has happened Ukrainian drone attack on Russian oil refinery. This is one of the most important and one of the Russia's most important refineries in the south. And it seems that I don't know if it's still burning there, but it was a huge, massive explosion there. What is going on in in the conflict on the battlefield that Ukraine has needed to do this?
Well, let me turn the question around. They do that. So, what does it do to Russia's military capability? Does it weaken its ability to deploy soldiers? No. Does it weaken Russia's ability to launch more attacks with drones, with fabs, with missiles? No. This is PR. This is attempt by Ukraine to try to portray Russia as, oh, Russia can't stop us. Yeah, you can blow up a refinery, you can attack an oil facility here and there, and Russia repairs it. It's not taken out permanently, but that's not. It's not like Russia sits there and it's got, this is our only oil refinery. They cover 11 time zones. They have oil facilities throughout Russia. So Ukraine, by doing this, is just, I think, increasing the resolve of the Russians to destroy Ukraine. Yeah, because that's the only way this is going to end, with the complete, utter defeat of the Ukrainian military and either the death or capture of its current leadership.
We had an interview of Lavrov on MSNBC. We talked a little bit about it before, but they brought up some critical issues when it comes to Ukraine, and one of them is one of the most common rhetoric in the West, in the mainstream media, in terms of killing civilians.
Mm-hmm.
Here is what Lavrov said.
Mr. Foreign Minister, here are the facts. Close to 50,000 civilians have either been killed or injured in this war. Russia has hit maternity wards, churches, schools, hospitals, a kindergarten just this past week. So either the Russian military has terrible aim or you are targeting civilians. Which is it?
Look, NBC is a very respectful structure, and I hope you are responsible for the words which you broadcast. I ask you to send us or to publicize the information to which you just referred, because we never targeted the civilian targets of the kind you cited. You might be mixing, the information, because it is a fact that quite a number of churches were purposefully hit by the Ukrainian regime. Quite a number of just civilian settlements, human settlements.
But what about your actions? What about your actions, Mr. Foreign Minister?
Look, we're going by circles. I told you already what we mentioned repeatedly, that we never target civilian sites, that we only attack the sites which are directly involved in the Ukrainian military machine, which the West is trying to beef up. And if you have any proof of what you just said about churches, kindergartens, schools, and so on and so forth, I challenge you, make it public.
Sure.
Make it public with the dates, with the addresses, and so on and so forth. As I said, it's NBC is a very reputed broadcasting agency, and it is
absolutely. It's all publicly, Mr. Foreign Minister. It's all publicly documented, and we have reporters on the ground who've
specific
seen it with their
information
own eyes.
when you make such claims.
Yeah, it's all publicly.
Projection. This is the same crap that the Zionists did in the aftermath of October 7th. Oh, Hamas killed 40 babies. They beheaded 40 babies. And I said, right, you know, I was back then, I said, really? What are their names? You know, grandparents who have grandchildren walk around with their pictures and talk about them. We didn't see one grandparent come forward mourning the loss of their grandson or granddaughter then. And similarly here in Ukraine. This is Western projection. During World War II, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, who was bombing and killing civilians? Sadly, my country. It was during the entirety of World War II, you never had the Soviets carry out a massive bombing raid on Berlin or Dresden or München or Stuttgart or Hamburg. That was the United States and Britain bombing and killing civilians. Russia, throughout its military doctrine, and it goes back over 80 years, at least in war, they're not killing civilians directly. They're not lining them up and putting them in pits and shooting them. Oh, that would be the Germans. Yeah, so this is Kirsten Welker is just, she's been a mouthpiece for Ukrainian propaganda. Because, as Lavrov was saying, really? Okay, give us the dates, list the casualties, because one of the things the Ukrainians are really good at is they'll make these claims, get the West all inflamed, but they never actually provide supporting evidence. I guarantee you that if Russia dropped a bomb that killed 100 actual civilians, the Ukrainians would have their bodies laid out, there'd be photographs, you know their names, etc. You don't get that. Not at all. It's like what happened with Bucha, where the Brits actually brought in bodies from other places, placed them on the street. They were dead Ukrainians that had died from Ukrainian action, not from Russian action. But then they blamed it on the Russians. So this is it's just part of the smear tactic. This is why I maintain that Donald Trump may be sincere about wanting to negotiate a peace with Russia, but it's not going to happen. The media, the establishment is too deeply committed, embedded in this notion that they've got to destroy Russia. And whether they do it overtly, covertly, with deceit, they're not interested in, hey, let's sit down and come to a peace agreement. Let's give Russia the security assurances it needs that we, NATO, are not going to continue to build up our menacing force on their western border. This is going to end in a war. There's no, I don't see any way to avoid it personally.
We've learned that Donald Trump is going to send short-range missiles to Ukraine.
Yeah. Hey, I'm all about peace. I'm going to send some more missiles. Turn the tables around. If Russia was sending missiles to Mexican drug cartels or sending missiles to Venezuela, you think the United States would go, oh, shucks, they don't mean it. Nonsense. Trump needs to, the old expression is shit or get off the pot. He needs to figure out, is he about peace or not? If he's about peace, stop the flow of weapons, stop the flow of intelligence, stop the flow of money, and say, no, we're not going to continue to enable this. But he doesn't do that. He does the opposite. And it's not just short-range missiles, what they call, I guess, the enhanced range attack missile, the ERAM. It can go up to 400 kilometers. So this is, that's
400 kilometers.
Yeah.
Wow. I think that Donald Trump is just removing those red lines that the Biden administration had somehow.
I mean, I just this constant indulging of people in terms of what they want to believe. It's just stepping back. What are the actions? What is he actually doing to say, okay, no, we're going to defuse this. And they said, well, he's got to play the politics of it because the Ted Cruzes and the Lindsey Grahams, they want to, I just, if you recall that interview that Tucker Carlson did with Ted Cruz, and that he, calls out, Russia's our enemy. I want to weaken our enemy. Wait a second. What has Russia done to us? What have they done? We tried to maintain that Russia interfered in our election. Then that turned out to have been a complete Democrat hoax. Russia has done nothing to attack, hurt, or harm the United States. We on the other hand, we got blood on our hands. And, I credit the Russians for being patient and having a level of tolerance. Candidly, and maybe we'll come to this, that Putin will finally stand up one day and say, okay, we've had enough of this. Any further attacks on Russian soil with missiles that come from either Germany, London, England, France, or the United States, we will retaliate and we will hit your country until you stop. People say, oh, that's going to go to World War III. That's where the hell we're headed, for God's sake. I mean, wake up, people. See, you got me all mad this week.
What's funny? They're talking about these missiles, Iran, as you mentioned. Europe is paying for all of them, and it's not the United. Who cares about who's paying for them?
Yeah,
because the outcome is the same for Russia.
Right. Whether you shoot me with a gun, or you basically hire somebody to shoot me with a gun, under the law, you're an accessory to murder. You're involved with murder. Okay? That's exactly what the United States is complicit in the murder of Russian civilians.
Larry, those people who you've mentioned that they're somehow optimistic about the relationship between the United States and Russia under the Trump administration, these people exist in the United States, in Russia as well.
Yeah.
But after all, can Donald Trump bring some sort of change to the attitude of the United States toward Russia? Do you see that coming in terms of the large scale, the big picture of what's going on between the United States and Russia?
No, not until the propaganda gets turned off. Just look at the hostility from that Kirsten Welker, who was asking Lavrov those questions. The accusatory, taking the prosecutorial, accusatory attitude, without actually any attempt to understand, without reporting the fact that there are documented instances of the Ukrainians using schools, using hospitals, using churches for military operations. And has Russia made some mistakes in there? Probably. I mean, they're human beings. Human beings make mistakes, but not as a matter of policy are they dictating that we're going to attack civilian targets. They've actually avoided attacking and causing civilian losses because that's not their goal. Their goal is to destroy the Ukrainian military and then to get rid of the Nazi influence.
I really believe, Larry, that the strategy of the United States and Europeans in Ukraine is based on the rationality or the logic of the Russian party, because they somehow believe that it doesn't matter how much they want to escalate the situation in Ukraine. Russia gonna respond rationally. They're not gonna escalate that. They're not gonna go in that direction. That's why they're doing everything. And do you feel that they don't see Russia escalating? That's why they're doing this?
Well, they have confused patience with weakness. They have convinced themselves that Russia is weak. Remember, when they were talking about that Russia was having to scavenge computer chips from washing machines and refrigerators just to put them in missiles so that they could fire a few, but at the same time, they're saying Russia's running out of missiles any day. And I can point you to people here in the States who are, they have a public following, or they're successful at writing newsletters, that they are convinced Russia's economy is in serious, serious trouble. Oh my God, they're going to collapse any minute now. And when you try to point out, say, okay, let's step back and look at this rationally. Compare Russia today to what Russia was in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Between that period, 91 to 98, 7-year period, Russia was in an economic free fall. They lost, the average lifespan of men declined because men were dying younger and earlier, many times because of suicide, alcoholism. The middle class was decimated. There was only about 7% of the people listed as being, the population considered to be a middle class. They had 2 periods of hyperinflation. So Russia's been through some very devastating economic circumstances in the past. Now, what do they have? Well, they had 4.7% growth last year. And in reaction to that growth, which was ignited inflation, the central bank said, okay, we're going to calm this down. They raised interest rates up to 22%. And it's slowed, as it's supposed to, slowed economic activity to the point that it's now growing at 1.5%. Since then, now starting in, I believe it was like May, Nabulina, the central bank president, she's now been steadily cutting interest rates, and the economy actually is recovering. And the thing that's most interesting is wages have not fallen in Russia, so people haven't lost their purchasing power. Because one of the things that's oftentimes can happen in inflation is, as prices go up, if incomes remain steady or even decrease, then people wind up being impoverished. I saw that firsthand in Argentina in 1984 during the hyperinflación, the hyperinflation that hit that country. And then they lament that, Russia's only got like 2.2% unemployment. Yeah, that's a problem. Do they have some labor shortages? Sure. Catastrophic ones? No. Because the one thing Russia continues to have going for itself, that the West refuses to grasp, understand, or appreciate, is it has every natural resource it needs to feed its people, to fuel its industries, to build whatever she wants to build. So, but I come back to it, that it is this kind of deliberate propaganda that is continuing to fill the minds of the American people. It definitely fills what's in the empty skulls of these members of Congress, of the senators and legislators. But until such time as America changes its attitude and can actually say, hey, Russia is not our enemy. I could come back and make a case that why we could view the Soviets as an enemy with international communism and et cetera, but even that was overstated. I wrote a piece, I guess on Thursday, in a reaction to this op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal by some guy named Varadajan. And Varadajan is quoting this so-called Russian scholar, guy named Kotkin, who is, he's a professor emeritus at Princeton, one of the top schools. And the stupid crap he said, for being a Russian expert, he's not a young guy. He's now an old guy, retired, younger than me, but still, 66 years old. And what he was writing was just not, or giving commentary to this Varadajan was just nonsensical. And Varadajan took a shot at Putin, said, "Oh yeah, Putin. Uh, uh, he thinks Stalin is his hero." What? You go back and look what they pinned. They go after Putin on that for saying that we really need a more balanced view of Stalin. And Putin concedes, yes, he was he was a monster in terms of violating the rights of people, secret arrests, executions. There were definite crimes committed, and Putin says he rejects that utterly. However, he notes that while Stalin was president, Russia went from a literacy rate of 21% to universal literacy. And it wasn't just that they could only read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. No, it was a dramatic upgrade in the education, universal education for all Russians, regardless of their social status. And he industrialized the country, and to the point that the Soviet Union beat the industrial West to space. So Putin, for acknowledging history, is accused of worshiping Stalin because he wants to go out and round people up and stuff them in gulags. It's just, like I said, this goes on. It's everywhere over here. And frankly, I don't think the Russians appreciate that.
Yeah. I think the whole strategy, Larry, of NATO, that prominent saying that says that keep Russia out, Germany down, and United States in.
Yeah.
It's what's going on in the United States and the Trump strategy toward NATO. It seems that the United States doesn't want to be in anymore. And the problem, by the way, the biggest problem for the United States, for the elites, for the establishments, deep state, whatever they call it, the blob and whatever they can, they're called, they see a region, a European region, Eurasia, and bigger picture of that region. They see the only superpower is Russia. This is the problem for them, Larry. There is nobody in Europe to balance that. I think as time goes by, the situation is getting worse. It's not getting better for the establishment.
Well, I'd say that the establishment is a bit like a 3-year-old child, short attention span. You know, this shiny object, that shiny object, you know, because they don't have a strategy. But they, you know, today Russia's the enemy, tomorrow it's China. You know, it's on. And what the Western elite do not recognize is the economic earthquake that is taking place right now, that is changing, that it will change the future in terms of how the world global finance is done. So, as an example, the effort to impose tariffs, bone-crunching tariffs on China and India has completely imploded. India has, you know, basically told the United States to go pound sand and said, we're gonna, you're not gonna dictate to us. We're gonna buy oil from Russia. We're gonna buy more oil from Russia. And when we buy it, we're gonna buy it in rupees and rubles. We're not gonna use your damn dollar. You can put your damn dollar in an outhouse and wipe your ass with it, is their attitude. What Trump has accomplished is the one class that was the biggest advocate in India for closer relations with the United States, for basically, you know, if we have to bow down to the U.S., let's do it because it's worth the relationship. Where's this business class of entrepreneurs who, and many of them who are directly involved with the oil and gas industry in India, all of a sudden they're going, you know, we're having no more of this. You know, so Trump has alienated the one political group in India that actually was pro-U.S. So now the anti-U.S. sentiment is rising. Similarly, I saw that China just made a deal to purchase, I think it was a mine in Australia. And again, they're purchasing it with Chinese currency. They're not getting dollars. So the previously any international transaction, man, you had to have a dollar. So that ends up creating a demand for dollars. Well, that demand is now dropping. It's not dropping necessarily in a way that you can say like 20% down, but it's dropping in a way that it's beginning to be noticeable. At the same time, here you have Europe with a vast number of those countries are at in excess of 100% debt to GDP ratio. We talked about this a little bit on Friday. So they're spending more money than they're taking in is a simple way to phrase it. And their economic growth they're stagnant or in recession. So, there's nothing, it's not like it's just one sector. The same phenomena is being repeated here in the States. Our economic growth is not as anemic as what's taking place in Europe, but the debt situation is getting worse, not better. And it keeps growing and growing. And we think we can just keep kicking the can down the road. Maybe we can. I don't believe it. But here's Russia. It's got I think it's now 19% debt to GDP ratio, okay? There's not a country in the Western orbit that's in that category. So, yeah, if there's a collapse in credit, they're fine. They've got plenty. And so China is actually, despite the persistent expectation on the West, that China's economy was going to implode and the economic chaos is going to come and people are going to rise up and get rid of the Communist Party. That's not happening. So again, what we're dealing with is delusional leaders here in the United States and in Europe who are incapable of, they are so blinded by their hatred and such that they can't appreciate what's actually taking place. In the notion, heard someone else argue, oh, Putin's isolated. Really? Look at what's happening with BRICS. Look at what's the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is taking place, I think, next week. End of this week. Start maybe Sunday, Monday next week. So Russia and China, they're not isolated. Their influence is growing because these other countries, there's so many countries around the world that have been victims of Western imperialism that they are starting to throw off those chains and go, by God, we're not going to live like that. You're not going to tell us what to do anymore.
Yeah, it seems as SCO going to be a very important summit because all of the heads of states are going to be there. Iranian president, Russian president, Chinese, and
Indian Modi will be there. Yeah.
It's going to be huge. It turns to be even more important than BRICS. All these people are there.
Yeah, I mean, the BRICS and SCO complement each other. Because I think every member is part of the SCO is part of BRICS. BRICS is actually bigger than the SCO. But they have two, sort of two different objectives, I think. Or the objective for BRICS is really to create an alternative global financial system where people can trade, do commerce, grow their economy without having to worry about the threat of U.S. sanctions for using the dollar. Now, it's not a direct attack on the dollar, but if that comes to pass, as that grows, it will be an attack on the dollar. So, Vladimir Putin's not lying when he's telling Trump, no, look, we're not trying to destroy the dollar. But what we are trying to do is that we got to take away your ability to try to hold us hostage. We're not continue living like that. You don't have the right. Nobody died and made you God.
Has Trump done anything to save dollar, to help to improve dollar so far?
I'd say no. I think when the full weight of the tariffs. So I saw there was I think it was either at Reuters or Bloomberg yesterday, that American farmers who were growing soybeans, their exports are down now 51%. Because China said, oh, you're going to threaten us with sanctions? Go screw yourself. We're going to buy from Brazil, which they did. Now, you're in Brazil, man. You got some happy farmers there. They're selling their product probably at a little more than what they would have been paid for, what the Chinese would have paid for if they bought it from the States. But China says, we're not going to continue to deal economically with this country that's insulting us and threatening us and calling us an enemy. We'll deal with Brazil. So as this starts to enter into the whole economic matrix, there is going to, I think there is a very high likelihood of an economic crisis, a global financial crisis, within the next 2 months. And I base that upon the fact that you've got this anemic growth in Europe, you've got this massive debt in Europe and the United States, and then with the prospects of the wars expanding in both Ukraine and the war between Iran and Israel sparking off again. There's just, again, and you don't have a strong leader on either side that's stepping up with the vision to say, hey, let's everybody take a deep breath. Let's calm down. Let's remember we're on this earth together. We're like in a lifeboat. Let's work together instead of working to kill each other. You don't have anyone doing that yet.
I don't know if you saw Smotrich talking about how they feel about the situation in the Middle East. He said that we defeated the head of Octopus, which means Iran. And we have defeated Yemenis, and they've bombed Yemen just
Sure.
2 days. Yeah.
And Yemen keeps firing missiles at them. I mean, again, these people are delusional. They don't understand what winning means, what victory means. They've decapitated Iran. No, all they've done is convinced the Iranians that the sort of the peaceful path that Pezeshkian was pushing. How's that for alliteration? The peaceful path that Pezeshkian was pushing is now been rejected. I mean, the Iranians are now beefing up and saying, okay, they've created a more powerful council for making military decisions, one that's not going to be vetoed by or controlled by Pezeshkian at all, and it's going to have more of the military's influence. Apparently, it appears they're beefing up the military cooperation with both China and Russia. They'd had cooperation previously, but nothing to the extent of allowing the Russians to come in or Chinese to come in and set up air defense systems. Again, I'm more biased. While the Chinese may have more capability to make stuff, I'm not. To my knowledge, it has not been combat tested in the same way that Russian systems have been. So with Russia, you know that it works. You know what you have. Chinese is sort of it's an unknown. Nonetheless, though, Iran's well positioned that if they are attacked again by Israel, they will decimate Israel this time. Before they were doing sort of tit for tat. This time I don't think they'll let that stand. And maybe, if Israel is decimated, that would be ultimately the only way to save the Palestinian people. But, I wish it didn't have to come to that, but I really don't see an alternative. I see an alternative, but I don't see the political will to do it. The alternative is real simple: a total economic embargo on Israel by Asia, Africa, South America, Europe. Total economic embargo. Israel would have to surrender at that point, would have to make a deal, and would have to start withdrawing troops. But we haven't even seen it, unfortunately, that I believe Russia, China, and India actually could do a whole lot, along with South Africa and Brazil, to lead the way, lead the charge, advocating, okay, Israel must be stopped. But they're not doing that. They've got, I guess, other fish to fry.
Larry, we had the head of the opposition in Israel, Yair Lapid, or I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, Lapid.
Yeah, Yair Lapid. He says that the war in Gaza has turned into an Israeli Afghanistan scenario.
Or Vietnam.
Yeah.
We keep hearing, boy, Israel's going into Gaza. They're going to look. They continue to drop bombs and kill civilians every day. They just killed 5 more journalists overnight. I mean, these Zionists are nothing but murderers. They're pure and simple. And yet, their hesitancy, there's still some sanity within the Israeli military. The IDF chief is saying, no, if we go into Gaza City, we're going to wind up killing all of our hostages that are there. We want to save the hostages. He does anyway. And the parents of those hostages want their children saved. But, Hamas is positioned to fight a deadly guerrilla war that's going to kill a number of Israeli soldiers. So this, again, Israel's belief in its invincibility has been exposed in the last 20, we're now almost at 23 months. Well, we are 23 months. The next month will be 24. And then we're to October 7th, the 2nd, we'll be starting the 3rd year of this war. And what I find fascinating is all these strong Israeli supporters who are talking about, look how bad Russia is. 3.5 years, they haven't been able to defeat Ukraine. Yeah, they're only fighting along a 1,200-mile front. They're fighting an army that is fully backed, equipped, funded by NATO. They're fighting an army that is actually has tanks, some artillery, and definitely, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And yet they've continued to advance. What have you, Israel, done in an area that's basically 100 square miles? Not 1,200 miles, but 100 square miles? A small confined area against a group of people that are not a professional army, are not armed and equipped by NATO, don't have NATO intelligence and surveillance on their side. They don't have tanks. They don't have artillery. Whereas you, Israel, have all of this, and you can't beat them. That's the reality. So, these people that on the one hand want to criticize Russia and claim Russia's doing nothing. Okay, apply the same standard. That means Israel is really in trouble.
Yeah, it seems that Netanyahu is headed toward the end. There is nothing else that Netanyahu can somehow use it to survive. Do you feel that what is the future of Netanyahu and his movement in Israel? What was the outcome of it so far?
Well, his popularity is definitely taking a hit. But he still, what's the old saying that the Cyclops, the one-eyed man, is king in the land of the blind. So he may have he has limitations and he has weaknesses, but he's not in a position where he can, rally more support. Usually the strategy sometimes is to go to war, hoping that in war you will unite people, force them to come to your side. But in this case, if he tries to expand the war, and go back to another exchange with Iran, it really could lead to the destruction. There's not I guess what I'm saying is there's not a political path for de-escalating this in Israel. It's on a collision course. They're working to try to get the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah. That's not going to happen. The governments agree to try to do that, but it's just, they physically don't have the means to carry that out. And Israel's going to, I think, have to start devoting more military resources to sustain its position in Syria. And again, Israel does not have unlimited resources. So that's where, when if you have a vessel of some sort, like a ship, and there's one seam that's weakened, well, you can work on strengthening that. But if you got 4 or 5 seams that are weakened, then that ship is in danger of actually having one of those seams break and take on water and sink. And that's why I think Israel is being pushed to a potential breaking point. And it's just, again, people, instead of acknowledging that, are just kicking the can down the road.
And even Donald Trump, with his total support for Netanyahu, I think he's not going to be able to change the tide, to change the things in the Middle East, because somehow the United States is so much, on one hand, wants to have some sort of dominance in the Middle East, but on the other hand, their support for Israel is just destroying everything that the United States has, the legitimacy of the movement in the Middle East.
Well, if Donald Trump actually, he could compel Israel to stop. He has that in his power, but politically he can't do that because his number one, he's got a substantial support from from the Zionist community. But there's also, and I know Ray McGovern believes this. I'm not. I can't dismiss it as unlikely, but that there is actually blackmail material in the hands of the Zionists that they will use against Trump if he in any way weakens in supporting Israel. So I said the United States could stop this, but it won't. But even if the United States doesn't try to stop it, I think my other point is that I still believe that countries like India, China, Russia, Brazil can take a leading role in bringing this to an end. But they're not doing it either. So it's not necessarily fair to blame only the United States.
Yeah. Larry Lavrov, during the interview, it seems that Russia has hit one of the U.S. factories in Ukraine. And here is what they're trying to, the people who are watching what's going on in the United States and the way the Biden type rhetoric is somehow attacking Donald Trump. They don't know how they can feel about what's going on in the United States, because these people they don't like Donald Trump getting closer to Russia. Just look at the interview, how she's asking the question to Lavrov. Yeah.
This week, Russia bombed an American-owned factory near the Hungarian border. I've spoken to people who frankly see that as a slap in the face to President Trump, to the entire peace process, isn't it?
Well, I would say that those who are sincerely interested in understanding what is going on should know by now that never ever Russia deliberately targeted any sites which are not linked to military abilities of Ukraine.
So
Yeah.
he's literally saying that they providing Ukraine with weapons. That's why we're hitting them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and this is actually the strategy. I wrote about this using under game theory. If you ask the question in game theory of how do you deal with an adversary or an enemy or with an entity, a person that has no intent at all of coexisting with you, of recognizing and accepting your position, of leaving you alone, but instead views you as an enemy and will continue to work covertly, discreetly to try to destroy you. What do you do? And one of those responses, one of the things you do is, apart from making very clear what your position is, and then in making that position clear, issue also warnings that you will respond in kind, you will reciprocate for any attacks on you. And so in this case, this is Russia is now going after the source of even civilian industry that's being used to produce drones or components that go into drones that are being used to attack and kill Russians, including Russian civilians. So that's why you've seen Russia over the past really 3 weeks has shifted in its and in its focus and the type of targets it's hitting. It's now going after major refineries, oil terminals in Ukraine, which Ukraine doesn't have the number that Russia does. So Ukraine is much more vulnerable. And then going after this factory. They also destroyed another missile factory, which was basically being used as a front to dress up the Taurus missile in a new costume and claim that it was Ukrainian. Russia's using its intelligence capabilities to identify those sites and destroy them.
Yeah, she said it was a slap in the face of the Trump administration, this attack. And here is what J.D. Vance said about it.
Trump, were you enraged when you learned that Russia targeted an American company based in Ukraine?
I don't
Was
like
that not
it,
a slap
Kristen.
in the face
I
to the
don't.
peace
I don't
process?
like it, Kristen. But this is a war, and this is why we want to stop the killing. The Russians have done a lot of things that we don't like. A lot of civilians have died. We've condemned that stuff from the get-go. And frankly, President Trump has done more to apply pressure and to apply economic leverage to the Russians, certainly than Joe Biden did for 3.5 years when he did nothing but talk, but do nothing to bring the killing to a stop. So you asked me what I'm enraged by. What I'm enraged by is the continuation of the war. What I'm enraged by is a presidency in Joe Biden who for 3 years did nothing to end the killing. What I'm actually excited about right now is that we have a president who's engaging in energetic diplomacy to try to stop the killing. That's as it should be. I think the American people should be proud of it. And whatever the outcome of this, whether the war ends in 3 months or 6 months or hopefully not beyond, but maybe, we should be proud that we have a president who's trying to stop the killing. He's done it, by the way, 6 wars that the president has brought to a close all over the world. This would be the 7th. It's the most complicated, but we're trying despite that.
I had the
Yeah, I mean, I am really tired of this nonsense that Trump has stopped 6 wars. I mean, it's a myth. It's a lie. It's being pushed repeatedly, and now it gets repeated so much people start believing it. One of those wars was Pakistan and India, and Trump's claim on that has pissed the Indians off so bad. That's another reason they're telling them, hey, you're not going to tell us to stop buying Russian oil. Screw you. You lied about how this war ended anyway. So anyway, sorry to interrupt. What was your question?
The question would be, he said that in 6 months they may put an end to the conflict. Do you think that's coming? He said that during the interview.
The United States won't. U.S. has the only way I want to say U.S. has zero leverage, because that's not true. U.S. has significant leverage over the Ukrainians, and by pulling the plug on Ukrainians, yes, the war could be ended next week, or in 3 months, or in 6 months. As long as the United States continues to enable the Ukrainians by continuing to supply even intelligence and to continue to maintain some financial support, the Ukrainian men and women are going to continue to die on the battlefield. Russia holds the leverage in terms of military response. There's nothing. Even if the West said, "Okay, we're gonna hit the alarm button. NATO troops come, all NATO nations come together. We're going to attack Russia." Europe would be destroyed. I mean, at that point, Russia would have no option but to use nuclear weapons. Or but with the Oreshnik, they don't have to use nukes. They can use something short of a nuke that appears to be equally devastating, without a lot of the collateral effects from radiation sickness. So Russia holds the military cards and is going to continue to play it. They are seriously trying to negotiate. That's why they've had 3 meetings so far with the Ukrainians. I don't know if a 4th one is scheduled, but so far what you get from the Ukrainian side is no, 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 no. We're not gonna surrender at any point. All right, then, it's just like a boxing match. If the opponent doesn't want to surrender, you keep beating them until they can't get up off the canvas, or you choke them out. And in this case, you're going to keep killing Ukrainian personnel until there will come a moment when they can no longer field a force to fight. There you go. 3 more F alliterations. Sorry.
Does Europe see Ukraine as the only reason, the only motive for the United States to be in Europe?
What do you mean?
I mean that it seems that in the eyes of Europeans, they see the only reason that the United States can stay in Europe would be the case of Ukraine. If they lose it, they're going to lose the United States geopolitically as well.
Yeah. I mean, that they actually may believe that, but then you got to step back and say, what's wrong with them? Why are they so insistent on the United States staying? Is it that the United States is pumping enough money into their economies through our military presence? Well, the only country that, I guess the main country that benefits from that is Germany, because of all the U.S. bases there. Maybe now Poland as well gets some economic benefit from it. France doesn't. UK doesn't. There's minimal presence in the UK. So I'm not sure within their thinking what benefit they do derive from this. But I think Europe is worried that once Ukraine goes, then there's no longer this U.S. commitment. In the back of their minds, they think maybe the U.S. would be willing to fight Russia. Again, and step back. Russia's not threatening to invade Europe. And Russia is, the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, God, they're obnoxious little countries. They're insignificant. They're meaningless in world affairs. All they are is like a potential irritant to Russia. Russia's content to just ignore them. Because if, let's say, all 12 million of the people that live in, or 13 million that live in all 3 countries combined, grab arms and start attacking Russia, Russia can easily handle that. And that's why the West is picking at using these little countries to try to develop opposition parties, because they want to use them as basis for future attacks against Russia. And so Russia's got, it has to figure out a containment strategy, or how to deal with Georgia, how to deal with Armenia, how to deal with Azerbaijan. And over the last week and a half, Russia's made it pretty clear to Azerbaijan what its policy is going to be. We will destroy you. And by destroying that Sokar oil installation in Odessa, Russia sent a very strong message to Aliyev in Baku.
The other point, Larry, considering Ukraine would be, as much as the governments in the United Kingdom, Germany, and France feel that the case of Ukraine may help them in somehow to be more connected with the United States, but on the other hand, you see drastic divisions within Europe, economically, geopolitically, the way that they see Russia, and even let's assume with a Ukrainian settlement, Ukraine joining the EU going to bring huge problems.
Well, yeah, apart from upsetting the farmers in the EU, creating some real disadvantages for them, the EU is not economically powerful anymore. It is a weakling, and it has no prospects for a strong economic recovery on the horizon. Europe is in real trouble. They are facing financial. They are genuinely facing financial collapse. And what I mean by collapse is to the point where the governments can no longer fund themselves and no longer provide the social services that are keeping the people at bay so far. And to bring Ukraine into that is just to bring another basket case. This is it doesn't. The only reason the Europeans might entertain that is their hope to exploit Ukraine for its natural resources. But Ukraine's, before this is over, I think all of the territory east of the Dnieper River will be under the control of Russia, unless the Ukrainians and the West comes to its senses and gets this thing to a negotiated halt, as Russia has laid out what the terms are.
Here is, Larry, what Lavrov said about Zelensky and the possible meeting between Putin and Zelensky.
Mm-hmm.
See, President Zelensky is the legitimate leader of Ukraine. President Putin doesn't recognize him as the legitimate leader of Ukraine.
No, we recognize him as de facto head of the regime. And in this capacity, we are ready to meet with him. But when it comes to signing legal documents, now you want to have the entire picture, just part of it, which suits you. When we come to a stage when you have to sign documents, we would need a very clear understanding by everybody that the person who is signing is legitimate. And according to the Ukrainian constitution, Mr. Zelensky is not at the moment.
Yeah, and then she came back to her, oh, yes, he is. Oh, no, he's not. The bimbo. She doesn't even understand, doesn't understand the Constitution. He's ruling by martial law. So, Lavrov made it very clear. Hey, we'll talk to him, but you got to have somebody that's actually legally under the Ukrainian Constitution competent to sign any agreement.
So what is if Donald Trump is honest in the way that he's talking about Ukraine, what would be the next step on the part of the United States? Do they really want to put pressure on Zelensky to have a new election?
They again, I come back. Trump has that in his power to do, but it requires cutting off intelligence, cutting off military, cutting off financial aid, or telling Zelensky, this is what you're going to do. And if you don't have it done by next Monday, then we will institute these guys. I mean, set the deadline, set the objective, tell them what they need to do. Trump's not willing to do that so far. We haven't seen any evidence of that.
Larry, we talk about Oreshnik many times. We talk about it. What is the escalation that could bring Oreshnik into the calculation in the Russian mind? What is that condition?
Yeah, if an Arrow missile strikes, or if a Western missile strikes deeper into Russia, or on a nuclear power facility. They've already, Ukraine has stepped up its attempted attacks on these nuclear facilities in Russia, and Kursk and Zaporizhia. Those two are the latest. I think you could see then Russia taking a decision to employ the Oreshnik.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today.
Yeah.
Paul Carrick-Roberts is here.
Yeah, I know. You said you had to bring in the better-looking, smarter guy. So okay, I understand. Paul, good to see you.
Thank you, Larry.
I'm out. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hello, Paul. How's it going?
Hey, Nima. Fine, thank you.
Paul, you wrote a new piece on your website. You said that maybe there is something at the end of tunnel, some sort of light at the end of tunnel. How do you see this situation? Is there any sort of hope in what's going on between the United States and Russia?
Well, Nima, I didn't write that piece. That was a piece written by a Russian geopolitical expert for the website. I thought we had a lot of explanations coming from people in the United States. And I asked him, could he provide one coming from the Russians, what they made of all of this? Because as you know, and we talked about, we were getting a lot of optimistic statements out of people like Witkoff about how accommodating Putin was to Trump, and was willing to trade land, and was willing to have some sort of NATO security guarantees to Ukraine and all of that. It didn't make any sense to me. And so I asked him what the Russians thought. And he said that Putin's position was clear and unchanged. There would be no land swaps. They're not going to have Ukraine in NATO just by refusing to admit that he was a member, that Ukraine was a member, and that the Russian position was what it had always been, period, and that he expected that would prevail. And I do too. I think that the Russian position, it's the only one. It's the only one that makes any sense. And as Putin and Lavrov have stressed for years, you have to address the root cause. And ending the conflict, it doesn't address the root cause. And we've talked about it before. The root cause is the absence of a mutual security agreement and NATO being on Russia's border. And that makes the Russians feel insecure. And so the root cause is insecurity, and the solution is to remove the insecurity. This, I think, will eventually happen once Putin realizes that he made a mistake and letting the war drag on so long. He was trying to avoid alarming the West by having a quick, convincing victory. And but the result was different from what he had hoped. The result was it drew the West more and more into it, and created more and more constituencies in the West for the war, and so on. So if we look, Neimer, at the recent developments, it's almost as if Trump has come to the conclusion that as Zelensky is so resistant, as Putin is inflexible on his position, that the best way for Trump to get out of it is for Russia to hurry up and finish the job. In other words, what he told Netanyahu, hurry up and finish the job in Gaza. We're tired of being embarrassed by it. Well, I think I think maybe he's taking the same approach to Ukraine, and he's just hoping that Putin will hurry up and finish the job. Because once all of the Russian territory is taken by Putin, he's met his war goals, and so then the question is, how big shall the buffer area be? And that will be up to Ukraine to avoid some ever larger buffer area, which eats up more and more of Ukraine by coming to their senses and saying, yes, you're right, we should be friends with Russia. Ukraine was part of Russia for most of our existence, and we don't need to be at odds with Russia and make a sensible solution. That then puts all kinds of pressure on Washington and the West to join in by saying, well, we don't really need to be at war with Russia either. Let's get NATO off the borders. So something like that, Nima, could happen. I mean, that's very optimistic, but that is a possible scenario. I don't particularly give it a 50-50 chance or anything like that, but it is something that could happen. The other kinds of solutions are difficult for Trump. For example, Trump cannot jettison the military security complex. The military security complex is present in almost every American state, either as a military base or as an armaments manufacturer. So they have tremendous influence with the governors and with the congressmen and senators because they're represented in their states, and they're also very important campaign contributors. And so if Trump took the approach we've talked about in the past, which is he just cuts off the weapons, cuts off the money, cuts off the diplomatic support, then Zelensky hasn't any alternative but to come to terms with Putin on Putin's terms. But if Trump does that, then all of these senators, Republican and Democrat, and congressmen and governors who are dependent on the military security complex, not just for jobs and taxes in the states, but for campaign contributions, they're going to get all over Trump's back. And it's going to cause him all kinds of problems. So you really can't do that. It's a constraint that's too big for him to challenge. So that sort of approach, which is the simple and most direct and most assured to work and get the thing over with, he can't take that approach. It's just ruled out. And then again, we have what we've talked about, the American hegemony doctrine. This is an institutionalized doctrine. And when Paul Wolfowitz gave expression to the doctrine, I think 1991, remember this doctrine, it was accompanied by the 7 countries in 5 years. So what Wolfowitz was really talking about was not just America's hegemony, but Israel's in the Middle East. Because what this doctrine, the purpose of this doctrine was to send the American forces at work clearing out opponents to Greater Israel. And so we got rid of 5 or 6 countries for them. And we don't know whether we'll be involved in getting rid of another 1 or 2, such as Iran. So that doctrine is there. And if Trump could somehow get enough members of the House and the Senate and his appointees, and they could all say, this doctrine is in the way of peace. How can we be seen as peacemakers, especially by Russians and Chinese and Iranians, when we have a doctrine that declares we have the right to have hegemony over them, and that our principal goal is to get rid of them if they are in a position to block our unilateralism? This is not a doctrine that a peacemaker can be credible with. And so if they could somehow repudiate, if Trump had enough support to repudiate this doctrine, this would help a great deal. I don't know whether this has ever occurred to Trump or anyone in his administration. I don't know how fierce opposition would be. I think a lot of conservatives would be saying, "Oh, he's selling us out to the Russians." He's, it would be a tricky thing, but it would be something worth a lot of thought and investigation. So if you look at the fact that he can't jettison the military security complex, and he's got this doctrine of hegemony hanging around his neck, which has a huge weight, the solution becomes Russia's triumph on the ground. And it looks like that's what's happening. It can't be far off unless Putin again slows everything down. So it would be a good thing, Nima, that if Trump can claim having settled the war in Ukraine, the good thing would be his hand would be strengthened against Netanyahu, putting us at war with Iran, because that's still there. That's an unsettled issue. We still don't know how Trump is going to handle that, and how he's going to avoid it and still survive the Israel lobby, which are every bit as powerful as the military security complex. So you can see the constraints that are on Trump. And it's very difficult for him to do anything. On the one hand, there's the military security complex. On the other, there's the Israel lobby. And as well as the hegemony doctrine. So it's a really difficult thing, and to talk about optimistic solution when a president is faced with such constraints. It would be a tremendous achievement for him to overcome these constraints and actually end the conflict with Russia, which is far more important than ending a relatively small and limited war.
Paul, we had the Knesset opposition leader Yair Lapid. He said that the war in Gaza has turned into an Israeli Afghanistan scenario. If Gaza is turning into Afghanistan, how can we imagine that Israel can go against Iran? Because it's how
Well, I don't see how Gaza's turning into Afghanistan. I mean, the place is destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of them are dead. The kids are dying of malnutrition and disease. People are dying of starvation. Everything's destroyed in the country. The entire infrastructure. There are no hospitals. There's no water systems, power. It's it looks to me like it's the Israelis have done to Gaza what the Romans did to Carthage. They've completely obliterated the place. There's still people alive, but they're all in some process of dying. If you look at the photos, you see the kids, they're skeletal. There's no medicine. It's a horrendous situation. And still the world doesn't complain very much about it. So I wouldn't agree with that conclusion. I don't think Israel can go to war with Iran. That's why they want us to do it for them. And you might say, well, why would we do that? Well, why did we do that for them in Iraq and Syria and Libya and Somalia, maybe Sudan? We've done nothing about the destruction of Palestine. In fact, we did that for them because we provided the weapons and the money and the diplomatic coverage, which they couldn't have done it without that. So, this is another American responsibility, the destruction of Palestine. So the real question is the Israel lobby and is the connection between Trump and the Zionists so secure that we will next be Israel's tool for dealing with a remaining obstacle to Israeli expansion? And that's the real question. And the fact that, how long has this Gaza destruction been going on? Well, the whole thing's been going on since 1947. But the actual physical destruction of Gaza, is this the third year? I can't remember. October the 7th of what year was Hamas attack? I've even forgotten. Was it 23?
23, yeah.
So it's been going on and the world's done nothing. And, I think I just saw that the Israelis themselves published a report saying that 80-something% of all the casualties were civilians. So the Israelis have admitted that they're not just killing Hamas soldiers. Well, I don't.
But the war in Iran, Paul, is something different. I think the United States has the Trump administration knows it well because of 12 days of war. It wasn't something beneficial to Israel, and we know what the administration in the United States has decided to interfere at the end of those 12 days just to put an end to the conflict because they saw what's going on with Israel and what's happening with the missiles coming to Israel. That's why I'm not sure why Israel would push for that.
Well, they would push to have us more involved.
But there are limitations to what the United States can do unless go nuclear. That would bring
Well,
The escalation would be huge if it goes in that direction.
it could. You have to remember, we're now on Iran's northern borders. We acquired this corridor. Runs along the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan with Iran. So Iran's now surrounded. There's always the alternative of using jihadists against them, the way we did against Syria. There's always the opportunity for further assassinations of Iranian leadership. I mean, if you think about how much of the Iranian leadership has been wiped out, it's just like the leadership of Hezbollah in Iran. Israel basically has decapitated the whole movement. You remember right on down to the cell phones that blew up, and even the lower level commanders in Hezbollah were killed. So there's always that opposition. There's always the threat that we will attack with nuclear weapons. It can be done. The question is whether Trump will get drawn into it. And he could. For example, if he gets rid of the Ukrainian war and somehow the Europeans don't continue it by buying all the weapons from the American military security complex, the American security complex is going to be looking for some other way to make profits, and they'll join with Israel. And we'll have Lindsey Graham and the rest of them fuming and yelling and screaming, and Iran is the threat, and all of this stuff can happen. You have to understand that politicians, they live in a world of constraints, and they're not like you. They're not going to sit there and think in a rational, reasonable way. They're in a predicament. How do I get out of it? And when you have people who have to make decisions like that, you can have all kinds of bad decisions. All sorts of things happen. I don't think you and I talked about it. I certainly wrote about it. I recently read A.P.J. Taylor's histories of World War I and World War II, and they were all the product of peace negotiations. And the reason was all of the people involved in the peace negotiations had so many constraints on them. They couldn't make a good decision. And so the effect was just blunders that piled on blunders until war was the only consequence. So that's the real way of politics. It's not these highly intelligent people removed emotionally, removed from any state thinking rationally about how do we solve this. That's not what happens. You you get all kinds of bad decisions, and even by really smart people, like Nixon and Kissinger. These were two really well-informed people. Nixon was probably the most informed president we've ever had in matters of foreign affairs.
I really feel, I really feel the way that you feel about Nixon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
See, he was desperate to get out of Vietnam. He didn't want that war. That was Lyndon B. Johnson's and the Democrats' war. He was desperate to get out, and the North wouldn't let him out. I think they decided to teach the colonial powers a lesson. And he couldn't get out in a way that wouldn't undermine his own domestic base. If he just walked away and lost the war, then all the conservatives would have been against him. You sold out freedom. You see, they had this theory about the dominoes, and if Vietnam fell, if South Vietnam fell, all of Asia was going to fall. And and this was just constantly drummed into people. So all the conservatives were for the war, not for any particular reason about the North Vietnamese, but to prevent the domino from falling, because it would bring communist tyranny closer and closer and closer to the free world. And so they were desperate to get out. They couldn't get out. And the only solution they could come up with was to escalate the force. So they went into Cambodia and Laos. We see they're still hated by the left, and they say, "Oh, Nixon promised peace, and he expanded the war." Well, he didn't want to expand the war. It was the only thing he and Kissinger could think of that looked like it might make the North Vietnamese negotiate something that would let the Americans out without handing them defeat. So that Nixon could claim, if we didn't win, at least we settled it between us or something. And so that it ended up disastrous for Nixon and even for Kissinger. Kissinger, they had so many arrest warrants out for him, he couldn't go anywhere. Now, it's amazing. An American Secretary of State, former National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, and he can't travel abroad because he'll be arrested. So that's what happens. It wasn't Nixon and Kissinger's mess. They inherited it when they came to office, and they couldn't get rid of it. And so they tried more and more force. NAFOM, Agent Orange. We go into Cambodia and Laos. Well, this is what really happens. And it's why I think peace negotiations are dangerous.
Paul, don't you think that the Wolfowitz doctrine has already destroyed itself because of what's going on in Ukraine, the rise of Russia, and how Europe has destroyed itself? And it's not just about Europe, it's about the total power of the West. You look at the South America, in Brazil, you look at India, the way that India is talking about resisting the US pressure. Look at BRICS, SCO, all these things that are happening. It's all against Wolfowitz doctrine. You look at the Wolfowitz and it's all against. How do you see that?
Well, I think you're right that the doctrine was never realistic, and now is even more unrealistic, but still the doctrine. And so it's some sort of a constraint that the policymakers in Washington don't want to confront. And if it wasn't still effective, why did we start the trouble in Ukraine? We overthrew the government. We are responsible for the war. It was all done to pressure Russia, to try to destabilize Russia, to make them feel like they had to accommodate us and accept our leadership to avoid these kinds of situations. So even the Ukraine thing is a product of this doctrine of hegemony. That's what all the fight with China is about. China's rising, and their approach in Asia is different from ours. It's come, be friends with us, we'll make you rich. It's not, hey, I want a military base here, or, you know. Um, so you're right, the doctrine is unrealistic, but it's still in effect. And why? Why is it in effect? What is it that prevents an honest assessment, not only of its unreality, but of all the trouble it's caused? And, you know, we've been on the verge of, if it hadn't been for Putin, we probably would have had a huge war by now. He just always turned the other cheek to avoid it. That's unusual. The same the Chinese. And we've already attacked Iran. So, yeah, we could attack them again. If when Israel can cause red states to pass laws that if you criticize Israel, you can't work for the government, you can't have a contract from the government, and you might even be regarded as a hate criminal or a terrorist, or, you know, this is power. And this kind of power is a constraint. If the Republican Texas government submits to it, it's clearly powerful. The same in Florida. The same in Florida. And DeSantis is seen by many people as a hero. And of course, to Floridians, he was. During the COVID thing, he didn't go along. There wasn't any damn lockdowns. They lasted maybe 3 weeks. He said, what the hell is this? He got rid of them. There weren't any mandates. All of the stuff that the rest of the, or most of the rest of the country suffered, it didn't happen to Florida. We went around our business. The beaches were open. But even he has been coerced into passing all kinds of laws that you can't criticize Israel. So this shows the nature of constraints, even on well-supported leaders. And so Trump faces them. There are all kinds of constraints. I mean, I've only talked about the military security complex and the Israelis, but there are lots of constraints on people, on political leaders, and it's hard for them.
Is China the main target of what's going on with the grand strategy of the United States? Looking at Russia and Iran, you mentioned both of them. Russia is in a direct war with the West for more than 3 years. Iran was attacked by Israel and then the United States. We know that these two countries they have a crucial role in what's going on in China because they're providing China with energy. China without these two countries going to be, I think, going to be they're going to be devastated. They're not going to survive it. Was that the main goal?
Well, it depends on how deep thinking they are in Washington about their hegemony, because clearly, if you deprive China of oil, they're in hot water. But if you do that, you're probably going to precipitate a war, because that's what we did to Japan. That's what Roosevelt did. He deprived Japan of energy. And so they said, we got to go to war, and they attacked Pearl Harbor to try to cripple our fleet so we wouldn't be able to interfere with them in the Pacific. So that is war. To deprive a country of energy is an act of war. And the Chinese would realize that. So it comes back to the danger to us of the hegemony doctrine. What does it really mean to be able to prevail over others? It's some sort of doctrine of ruling by force. In the past, we've relied on bribes or bags full of money. We just give the leaders bagfuls of money, and so they comply. But if you're going to rely on force, the result's likely to be war. And of course, the Chinese are a powerful military operation. I mean, they've got nuclear weapons, they've got intercontinental ballistic missiles. Do you remember some years ago when some idiot in Washington published a plan about how we would take out China with nuclear weapons? The Chinese immediately responded with their plan, showing how they take us out. Do you remember that? They said these missiles are coming in this way and these are over here. So I don't see a gain from trying to exercise hegemony if there's any likelihood the outcome's going to be a major war, especially one with nuclear weapons. Where's the gain? So why take that kind of risk? It's much better to have friends than enemies. Now, this is not true for the military security complex. They need enemies for their budget and their power. And it's not true for Israel if you have this goal of greater Israel. But for most people, it's far better to have friends than enemies. So how powerful is the government in Washington if Israel and the military security complex can force us to have enemies instead of friends? Putin has made it clear for years he wants to be a friend of the West. That's what they want. And China has made it clear he wants to cooperate. Let's get along. Let's make money together. Why are we going to fight over who has 51% and who has 49%? 49% is still a lot. And of course, we've been after Iran on our own without Israel's prompting ever since the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah and seized the American embassy and held them captive. And so it's a failure of diplomacy in the United States. That's what it is. It's just but it has historical reasons. We had the Cold War, so people are used to the Russians being the enemy. They've been the enemy since 1950. And Iran's been the enemy since Khomeini and his revolution and installing
1979, 1980. Yeah.
and installing an Islamic government. This particularly annoys the liberals because they don't want any religion anywhere, much less a government in control of a government. So how you deal with all these constraints and unresolved problems and inherited problems, it's a very difficult thing. And Trump is really in a spot. It's really hard. It's like I already said, look at the trouble Nixon was in. He couldn't get out of the Vietnam War in any way that wouldn't destroy him with his own constituency. See, it's unrealistic of the left to think that the president is going to commit suicide by surrendering to the North Vietnamese or walking away, which is what we eventually had to do. We were forced to walk away. The same in Afghanistan. So, and I suspect it'd be the same in Iran and certainly Russia and China. So, why carry on with these antagonisms? That's what everything should be focused on. How do we get rid of these antagonisms? And the discussion should be open so that people start to understand that they're stupid to hold Trump accountable if he resolves a situation that's a threat to us. But they think that somehow that we've been demeaned by solving the situation because we didn't triumph in some way. When people think like that, that's the constraint on people. And I described it on Nixon, and I've described it on Trump, and that's just the situation. And I'm repeating myself. A.J.P. Taylor described it, World War I, World War II, on all of the participants. They had these constraints. They simply could not make a good decision. And the people were in the countries were all brainwashed and propagandized and full of ancient hatreds and so on and so on. And these were constraints, along with the moneyed interest and the financial interest and personal agendas and ambitions. And all of that makes it very difficult. Politicians are not dictators. They're not Caesars. And in fact, in history, not even dictators and Caesars are free of constraints.
Paul, with the case of the military industrial complex, I think in a short run, you can argue that they are the winner of what's going on in Ukraine. But in a long run, the way that they have been humiliated during the process of war in Ukraine is somehow damaging to the picture they had before.
Well, not necessarily. It's kind of like the Vietnam War. All the conservatives said we could have won that war, but they wouldn't let us fight it. They didn't let us go in and destroy North Vietnam. Well, one of the reasons was it was unsure what the Soviets would do. And so when you're trying to fight a war without the risk of nuclear weapons getting involved, and your opponent's determined, then you are fighting with one hand tied behind you. And so this becomes an excuse for people like the conservatives. Well, we would have won, but they wouldn't let us fight. We had to fight with our hands tied behind us and blah, and so on. So these kinds of nothing really seems to discredit the military security complex because its campaign contributions are more important. Not even airplanes that don't work. Not even amazing cost overruns that go on forever. Not even missing trillions of dollars the Pentagon can't account for. Where'd all that money go? These things don't have the effect that you might think they would have.
Paul, I think the positive sign in with the meeting between Donald Trump and Putin was the case of ceasefire. Donald Trump has stopped talking about ceasefire. Here is what JD Vance said in his recent interview about the ceasefire.
Sanctions were not going to lead to a ceasefire. I think that's obviously correct. If you look at the way the Russians have conducted themselves, they don't want a ceasefire. They don't want a ceasefire for complicated reasons. We, of course, have pushed for a ceasefire, but again, we don't control what Russia does. If we did, the war would have been over 7 months ago. What we do believe, though, is that we continue to have a lot of cards. The President of the United States has a lot of cards left to play to apply pressure to try to bring this conflict to a close, and that's what we're going to do.
What are those cards that JD Vance is talking about, Paul?
The imaginary, the imaginary cards. Look, it was the reason Putin went to Alaska was that the offer that Putin said Witkoff made, which was reasonable, was a meeting with Trump with no preconditions. I found that out from the Russians. So the reason Putin went was there are no preconditions. So he has had to agree to anything to have a meeting. And he went to see if Trump could understand his position about the root causes. And it seems at least Trump got the point that a ceasefire doesn't advance anything in terms of the root causes of the war. So that's a good thing. And if Trump continues to gain an understanding, he still is constrained by everything we've talked about in this program. And so I think for Trump, the favored solution is that Putin get off his butt and win the war. That's the way Trump can get rid of it. And then he can grandstand in presiding over the surrender of Zelensky to Putin and get some sort of credit. And I think Putin would let him do that. Now, Putin is not the North Vietnamese. He's not out to teach the colonialist power a lesson. He's out to find a solution. So I think that that's the most favorable outcome. And it really requires on Putin to realize he's made a terrible mistake in letting this war go on for so long. And that it's the long-lived war that's the cause of the current problem. If that war had lasted a few weeks, a few months, and been over and done with, the whole world's attitude toward Russia would be different. There wouldn't be any thought of, oh, we can wear them down, or we can cause dissent and undermine the government. All those kinds of crazy talk we've had, it wouldn't be there. People say, sure, you don't want to mess with them. You see what happens. We got to figure some way to live with them. It's kind of like that movie, The Outlaw Josie Wales, where Clint Eastwood rides up to the Indian chief. And he says, I'm not using exact words, but he says, look, we've got to figure out how to live together or we're going to kill each other. And they figure out how to live together. So that's the real challenge. And you're not living together if you're exercising hegemony or trying to. So my view is the hope is that Putin understands that Trump is inclined for Putin to proceed the way Trump told Netanyahu to hurry up and get it over with. We're tired of it. It's causing me too many problems. Get it over with. And this may be what happens. And I don't really understand why Zelensky and the Europeans can't see the writing on the wall. That's the real puzzle. What is Zelensky thinking? And
He's thinking of his mansion in Florida. He's not thinking of anything else than that.
well, I think, as you said the last time we talked, they're sending out $50 billion a week, $50 million a week or a day or something like that. Well, he must be one of the richest men in the world now. He must be up there with Bezos and Bill Gates. So why doesn't he just give up and leave and go enjoy his these kinds of
Because
puzzles.
the people who are paying him, they didn't say to him that it's done. That's the only reason.
Yeah, it could be if he cashes out, then they'll just assassinate him and take this money back.
Thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Yes, this is always a pleasure talking with you, Nima. Thank you very much.
See you soon.
See you
Bye-bye.
soon.
Bye-bye.